We had a secondhand store because, well, okay, going back. We had a mortgage company, and it was around 2007.
Brandi Passante didn't just walk away from Jarrod Schulz. She walked away from everything they built together. And sources say what pushed her to that breaking point is far darker than anyone knew. She kept quiet for years, and that silence spoke volumes. But now the story she's been sitting on is finally coming out. And it's not what fans were expecting. So what has she been keeping secret all this time? Join us as Brandi Passante finally reveals the truth about Jarrod Schulz. The 4 words that broke a decade of silence. For more than a decade, Storage Wars sold its audience a very specific version of a relationship. Brandi Passante and Jarrod Schulz joked through dusty units, argued over the value of lockers, and made a name for themselves as reality television's most entertaining fighting couple. What the cameras never captured, and what the network never informed its viewers of, was that the relationship audiences were still watching unfold on screen had already ended years earlier in real life. By the time it was out in the open, it was not in the headlines, but in 4 quiet words spoken on a season premiere. And what happened after those 4 words was far more complicated than anyone watching that night could have guessed. Brandi Passante met Jarrod Schulz when she was about 18 years old, long before either of them had any reason to expect a camera crew would ever be involved in their lives. They met in 1999 at a carpet cleaning company in Tustin, California, where Jarrod Schulz was a sales manager and Brandi Passante had just been hired. The power dynamic was awkward from the start. He was technically her boss, and company policy discouraged exactly the kind of relationship that developed anyway. Brandi Passante has described it as anything but instant, telling an interviewer that he wore her down through sheer persistence, following her around until she gave in. Jarrod Schulz's version, predictably, involved her doing the chasing. Apparently, a mutual friend was so concerned with the peacekeeping that they left notes on Jarrod Schulz's truck reminding him to be kind to her, which says something about how the dynamic between them was already being managed by the people around them before it had even properly begun. Together, they created something genuine outside of the show, a thrift store called Now and Then in Lake Forest, California, filled with merchandise from storage units they purchased on camera. And this was a real retail operation with real inventory and real customers. So when Brandi Passante talked about pricing a vintage dresser or reading a competing bidder on the show, she was using real business instinct, not putting on a show for the audience. At a storage unit auction, producers approached Jarrod Schulz and offered him a spot on the new series. It was only when they went to the Now and Then store and watched Brandi Passante work with customers on the floor that they knew the show needed her too. In response to a fan question about her noticeably raspy voice, she has also spoken publicly about living with Hashimoto's disease, an autoimmune condition that affects the thyroid and can produce fatigue, vocal changes, and a long list of symptoms that don't respond to simply pushing through them. For most people, running a business, raising 2 children, having a chronic illness, and filming a reality series would have been enough. Doing all of that while a relationship was quietly falling apart in the background was the part of the story that rarely made it into any single article written about her. So when did things start to fall apart? And how long did she carry that reality before anyone outside her circle had a clue? A decade of storylines. Storage Wars premiered in 2010, and from the very first episode, Brandi Passante and Jarrod Schulz were fixtures of the cast, appearing for 12 seasons straight. The show's producers nicknamed them the Young Guns, a label that referred to what set them apart from the rest of the cast. They were the youngest bidders in the competition, the ones with the least capital and the most to prove, and audiences immediately responded to that positioning. 12 years is a huge amount of time for a private reality to diverge from a public storyline, and the gap between what viewers believed and what was actually happening had been widening for far longer than anyone realized. In 2014, A&E gave the couple a spin-off, Brandi and Jarrod, Married to the Job, a series that was based on the idea that audiences wanted more of their domestic life, not less. It lasted 9 episodes before being quietly canceled, a fate that suggested the longer, less curated version of their relationship was simply not as compelling once it had more room to breathe than a half-hour auction segment allowed. They also tried to expand their retail operations during the run of the original show, opening a second Now and Then in Long Beach to capitalize on their growing television profile. The Long Beach store never turned a profit and eventually closed, a setback the cameras captured candidly, and that quietly illustrated the gap between the couple's on-screen momentum and the practical realities of what they were building on it. But in those same years, there was a much more serious chapter unfolding in the background, one that had nothing to do with storage units at all. In 2012, a man named Hunter Moore, who ran a website devoted to posting non-consensual explicit images and was famously dubbed by Rolling Stone as the most hated man on the internet, posted a video that he claimed featured Brandi Passante, although this was a lie. In October of that year, Hunter Moore personally sent Brandi Passante the link to the content with the message, "Love the pics," a detail that turned what might have been an anonymous act of harassment into something deliberately targeted and calculated. When her attorney contacted him about the subsequent lawsuit, he responded with a photo of himself and a mocking message addressed to the lawyer by name. Brandi Passante filed suit against him in federal court for defamation and related causes of action, seeking $2.5 million in damages. Hunter Moore never put up any real defense. He entirely ignored the case. After he failed to respond, a federal judge in California ruled in Brandi Passante's favor by default in June of 2013, ordering Hunter Moore to remove the content permanently and awarding her $750 plus attorney's fees, a sum widely mocked online as absurdly small given what she had endured. The judge said Brandi Passante had provided no basis for calculating the larger figure she sought. She had technically won, but the financial outcome did little to make amends for what had already been done to her reputation. In 2015, Hunter Moore himself was later charged by federal prosecutors for hacking victims' email accounts to obtain additional material for his site. The case was unrelated to Brandi Passante's, but it put the nature of who she had been dealing with into even sharper relief. She took it all in, with 2 young kids waiting for her at home and a relationship already showing cracks behind closed doors, continuing in front of the cameras as if nothing had changed. All of that was hidden beneath the surface of a partnership that the public still believed was steady. The real unraveling began in 2018, and remarkably, it would take 3 more years before the world found out. The 3 years nobody knew about. Brandi Passante and Jarrod Schulz's relationship ended in 2018, shortly after they wrapped filming on Season 12, which premiered that November. Then Storage Wars went dark for an unusual 2-year hiatus, partly due to contract negotiations between the cast and A&E. Throughout that entire break, Brandi Passante and Jarrod Schulz were separated behind closed doors, while viewers had no reason to believe anything was different. Their social media accounts were no help either, offering no clues, and the silence was almost passively reassuring that the relationship everyone had grown attached to was still intact. And when the show finally returned for Season 13 in April of 2021, both of them were back on screen, working the same auctions and appearing in the same scenes. But longtime viewers saw that something had changed. They make separate bids. They only talk to each other when production demanded it. The chemistry that had once been the whole reason they were paired together had cooled to something more like working together. On the April 20th premiere, Brandi Passante finally said the words straight out. She was no longer with Jarrod Schulz. She said briefly that the split came after season 12. She offered no further explanation, no timeline, no acknowledgement of why an entire additional season had been filmed with the two of them privately separated the whole time. Jarrod Schulz, for his part, responded in similarly clipped terms, telling viewers that just because they were no longer together didn't mean they couldn't show up at the same auction. They'd just do so separately. What she didn't mention that night, because it hadn't happened yet, was that 10 days after that premiere aired, an encounter at a bar in Orange County would turn into something the local district attorney's office would handle as a criminal matter. A bar in Lake Forest. Brandi Passante was out at a bar in Lake Forest with a group of friends on April 30th, 2021. According to reporting from TMZ citing law enforcement sources, Jarrod Schulz arrived at the same location, and the two became involved in a heated exchange. Brandi Passante told him to go. He didn't, and it went downhill from there. Jarrod Schulz was accused of pushing Brandi Passante 2 times while yelling at her and her friends. Someone called the police, and Jarrod Schulz was gone by the time they got there. Several days later, when police interviewed him, he denied having any physical contact with her. The following month, the Orange County District Attorney's Office said Jarrod Schulz had been charged with 1 count of misdemeanor domestic violence battery. The complaint identified the alleged victim only as Jane Doe, someone he had previously been in a relationship with. Language the DA's office never publicly clarified further, but that almost everyone following the story understood. Also, most coverage didn't mention an additional detail. The bar where the confrontation happened was the Rush Bar and Grill in Lake Forest, an establishment that Jarrod himself owned and had opened in 2018, the same year the relationship ended. The fact that the incident took place in a venue that was his professional territory added a dimension to the encounter that the bare facts of the charge alone did not fully capture. A&E acted fast, reportedly launching an internal investigation into Jarrod Schulz's future on the show, his role described by industry sources as essentially suspended while the review played out. Jarrod Schulz denied touching Brandi Passante when questioned by police and pleaded not guilty when the case went to trial. Through his representatives, he maintained that he was not interested in any plea arrangement that did not result in a full dismissal. Brandi Passante never officially sat down for an interview about what happened that night. What she did months later, in October of 2021, National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, was post a message to Instagram plainly stating that domestic violence does not discriminate by race, gender, economic status, or social standing. She didn't bring up Jarrod Schulz. The timing alone was enough, 5 months after the charge went public, to make the meaning clear to anyone who had been paying attention. And the choice to couch her own experience as part of a larger issue instead of a personal complaint said something about how she had learned over the years to carry difficult moments in public. It was the same instinct that had guided her response to the Hunter Moore case nearly a decade ago. Take the hit quietly, then pivot whatever attention remained to something that might actually help somebody else. But the bar confrontation wasn't the first sign of trouble in Jarrod Schulz's life during those years, and to get the full picture, you have to go back further than most coverage ever did. A pattern that had been building for years. 2 years prior to the bar incident, Jarrod Schulz had been charged with resisting an officer in July of 2019, following an incident in Lake Forest. Then, only months after the domestic violence charge was filed in April of 2021, he was charged for driving under the influence in October of that same year. Court records showing his blood alcohol content was at or above the legal limit on the night of October 5th. He had 3 separate criminal cases open at the same time: the resisting arrest, the domestic violence battery, and the new driving under the influence charge. Eventually, Orange County court records showed that all 3 were consolidated into a single proceeding, with a jury trial scheduled for June of 2023. None of this took place in isolation, away from Brandi Passante's life. Though her name was not directly attached to most of it, she had 2 kids for him. They had a business together. She had spent more than a decade building a public identity with him. Whether her name was in the headlines or not, every legal mess that touched his life was in the same world where she was raising children and running a household. It is also worth noting that Jarrod Schulz's legal history did not begin in 2019. He was released on probation 60 days after his arrest in 1997 on felony possession of methamphetamine, before storage wars even existed. He was arrested again in under a week, this time on a charge of transporting narcotics while intoxicated. Dealing with a repeat offender who had reoffended almost immediately after his first release, the judge sentenced him to 16 months in state prison. According to a source cited by Reality Weekly, the experience of serving that second sentence alongside violent offenders and others who had committed far more serious crimes was the event that finally forced him to reckon with where he was headed. He met Brandi Passante 2 years after he got out. The earlier conviction, the 2019 resisting arrest charge, the 2021 domestic violence charge, and the October 2021 driving under the influence charge all added up to a pattern that the show's own 2-year hiatus had conveniently hidden from the public, until it could no longer be ignored. That broader context helps explain something Brandi Passante said publicly just 2 months before the bar incident, a comment that drew far less attention at the time than it probably deserved. What she meant when she talked about losing herself. In a YouTube interview series in February of 2021, Brandi Passante said that for many years she really hadn't been allowed to have an identity of her own, and that the period since the split had become about figuring out who she was outside of the relationship. She said she no longer felt attached to anybody that way and was feeling relieved rather than sad about it. In another interview around the same time, she told the Dad Diary that she'd been essentially a single mother since their separation, saying her kids were with her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. She added flatly, with more weight than any elaboration could have, that she had done most of the parenting on her own for a long time anyway. And what the household was now missing was simply the sound of a stern voice in the background. The storylines on the show almost always revolved around Jarrod Schulz, his bids, his schemes, and his reactions. Brandi Passante was the response to him, the eye roll, the reality check, and rarely the one whose decisions contributed to the plot. It seems the same imbalance was present off-screen, only without an editor to make it entertaining. Day to day, the children were mostly hers. The business decisions seemed to fall to him. On paper, their public identity as a pair belonged to both of them, but it had always been built around his personality far more than hers. Rebuilding her own sense of self after that meant starting almost from scratch, figuring out who she was when she was no longer just reacting to someone else. That process ultimately resulted in a version of Brandi Passante that looked very different from the one audiences had known for over a decade. Brandi Passante returned to Storage Wars as a solo competitor starting in Season 13 and remained through Season 16, which aired in 2025. The woman bidding on screen during those later seasons made her own calls with her own money, without anyone beside her influencing the decision. In promotional material for Season 16, she said that she had occasionally used a bit of misdirection on competing bidders, a skill that someone who had spent years reading unspoken signals in a difficult relationship had clearly learned to apply somewhere more useful. In August of 2025, she launched a podcast called The Real Reality with Brandi Passante, an interview series where she talks to guests about fame, identity, and what happens after the cameras turn off. The title alone told you about what she was building. After years of having her own story filtered through a network's editing choices, she was finally building a space where she controlled the narrative completely. So, what do you think? Was Brandi Passante right to finally speak out? And after everything that's come out, do you think she and Jarrod Schulz will ever be on good terms again? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.